In the tangled backwoods of southeastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian foothills press against the edges of the Cumberland Plateau, there's a story that regional historians have quietly argued about for more than a century and a half. County documents from 1847 reference an unusual civil dispute involving two African women of extraordinary height, and a transaction so strange that the presiding magistrate ordered the testimony sealed permanently. In the margin beside that order, the clerk scrawled a note in shaky handwriting. "Lord, help us all." 3 families who lived through those days left behind sworn statements, each one contradictory, each one unbelievable in its own way. What truly happened when a failing Kentucky farmer made a decision that should have ruined him, only to be met with an offer that violated every rule and expectation at the time? The truth, buried inside forgotten county ledgers and faded family Bibles, is far more unsettling than any legend passed down through the years. Before we continue with the account of Elias Harrington and the 2 women who transformed everything he believed about mercy, fate, and survival, a small request. If you're listening from Kentucky, Tennessee, or anywhere along the old water routes where these events took shape, leave a comment telling us your hometown. And subscribe to Liturgy of Fear for more long-buried American mysteries as we uncover what really happened on that cold November morning in 1847. The tale begins not with bravery, but with a desperation so complete it carried its own stench. Unwashed skin, stale whiskey fumes, and the particular scent of hope decomposing in Kentucky clay. The autumn of 1847 found Elias Harrigan exactly where he had been for 6 long years, shin-deep in creek mud, coaxing what little he could from 40 unforgiving acres of stubborn, rock-bitten soil. At 34, he looked closer to 45. Harsh lines bracketed his mouth. His hands, once steady enough to fix a silver watch spring by candlelight, now trembled most mornings until he swallowed his first drink. His farm lay 12 miles south of Barbersville in a hollow so narrow that during winter months sunlight only touched the cabin for a few short hours each day. Locals called the place Harrigan's Hollow, though never when he was within earshot. Some claimed the land was cursed. Others believed Elias had simply chosen foolishly, settling on a plot that would break any man's pride and bones. His wife, Ruth Ann, had died in childbirth 3 years earlier, taking their infant son with her. The small wooden cross he carved for them still stood along the eastern fence line, weathered gray like the stones that surrounded it. He had planted wildflowers there the first spring after her passing. By the next spring, he could no longer bear to approach the grave. By the 3rd, he stopped paying attention to seasons entirely. Time dissolved into a blur of failed harvests, rising debts, and bottles empty beside the hearth. Harrigan was not a man given to politics or grand philosophies. Raised in a stern Methodist household, he had been taught that diligence and righteousness were rewarded in this life and the next. But the last 3 years had provided only evidence to the contrary. He knew neighbors whispered about his drinking, about the way he had let his field surrender to thistle and broom sage after Ruth Ann's death. The congregation no longer included him in Sunday visits. When he walked into town, conversations thinned. People found excuses to cross the road. He had become what every small community fears most, a living reminder that tragedy could strike anyone, that divine grace was uneven and unpredictable. He owed the general store $47, a crushing debt with no possibility of repayment. The proprietor, a narrow-eyed man named Carver Michaels, had begun making pointed remarks about overdue accounts. Those remarks would soon turn to demands, then threats, then legal action. Harrigan had seen it before. Farmers losing everything, some drifting west, some sliding into poverty until they became invisible, others simply vanishing without explanation. His nearest neighbor, a tanner named Vernon Pritchard, lived 2 miles west along a trail that turned to muck during hard rain. Vernon had tried to help after Ruth Ann's death, bringing meals, offering to assist with harvest, inviting Elias to supper. But Harrigan pushed everyone away, sinking deeper into grief and whiskey until even patient Vernon gave up. Now they exchanged only the minimal gestures of neighborliness, away from afar, a nod at church gatherings Elias rarely attended. Kentucky in 1847 lived in a state of quiet tension. The state permitted slavery, but lay dangerously close to free territory north of the Ohio River. This geography bred anxiety among slaveholders and complicated social expectations for everyone else. Barboursville housed barely 300 people, yet the surrounding county contained more than 20 sizable estates, each worked by anywhere from 15 to 60 enslaved laborers. The town square had an auction block where people were sold on the first Monday of every month. Harrigan had witnessed several of these auctions and found them unsettling in ways he couldn't articulate, so he simply avoided town on those days. The peculiar institution, as polite circles called it, created a pyramid built on wealth and fear. At its top sat the long-entrenched landowning families, the Talmadges, the Covingtons, the Devereaux, whose fortunes grew from hemp, tobacco, and the exploitation of human lives. Beneath them stood lawyers, physicians, and merchants who profited from the plantation economy. Below that tier were middling farmers with 5 to 10 enslaved workers. At the base stood the poor white farmers, men like Harrigan, who owned small parcels of land but worked every inch themselves. They lived in an uneasy position, legally above enslaved people yet far below plantation owners in security, wealth, and influence. They were expected to resent enslaved laborers as competition, while simultaneously supporting an institution that kept them poor. And the conflict between resentment and racial loyalty was resolved through one brutal, simple principle. No matter the differences between a poor man and the wealthy planter who ignored him, society taught him he still had more in common with the richest slave owner than with the most skilled enslaved laborer. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 remained firmly in effect, and Kentucky slaveholders enforced it with zeal. Bounty hunters, slave patrols, and freelance trackers drifted through the region like hungry wolves, always scanning for men and women attempting to slip north toward freedom. The reward for capturing a runaway could feed a destitute family for months. Some men built entire livelihoods around that pursuit. Others simply watched carefully, knowing that turning in a fugitive meant favor from the county's elite, and favor meant store credit, leniency at tax time, and the possibility of one's name being mentioned in the parlors where decisions about the county's future were quietly made. Harrigan avoided thinking too deeply about any of that. He struggled enough to keep himself alive without wrestling with the great moral questions of the day. But, as fate often arranges, those questions were about to find him, forcing him to confront who he truly was and what he believed about mercy, justice, and the price a man pays for his own soul. The farm itself told the plain story of his unraveling. The western field, where winter wheat should have been planted, lay bare and wasted. The chicken coop that Ruthin had painted bright red now revealed bleached gray boards beneath curling flakes of paint. The well rope had frayed to the point of danger. The cabin roof leaked in 3 different places. He had placed buckets beneath the worst drip lines and learned to sleep around the sounds of falling water. Ruthan's vegetable garden, once tidy and bursting with life, had retreated back into wildness. Some nights, drunk and caught between dream and memory, he imagined he could see her kneeling in the soil again, hands stained dark, her face glowing with quiet pride in the work she loved. But when he woke fully, he saw only tangled weeds and creeping vines. His one mule, an aged brute named Jackson, was stubborn as original sin and twice as contrary. The mule had outlived 2 owners before Elias bought him for $8 he never should have spent. Jackson had also outlived Ruthan, a fact Elias found offensively unfair. At 23 years old, the mule showed no sign of dying. Harrigan suspected Jackson would outlive him too, if only to spite him. His other livestock consisted of 4 inconsistent egg-laying hens and a half-wild hog he'd bartered for previous spring. The hog lived mostly in the woods, appearing only when she smelled food. Harrigan had named her Mischief, a joke he found hilarious only when he was drinking. The cabin was a single 16-foot square room constructed from chinked logs. A stone fireplace took up most of the eastern wall. His bed was a rope frame holding a corn shuck mattress Ruthin had hand-sewn years earlier. A small table, 2 chairs, and a few battered cooking tools completed the furnishings. On a shelf above the door rested Ruth Ann's Bible, her name written carefully in looping ink on the inside cover. Ruth and Carpenter Harrigan, born 1815, married 1840. The death date remained unwritten. Elias couldn't bring himself to inscribe it. Leaving the page blank felt like a tiny act of rebellion against finality, as if the omission meant she might return someday. His rifle leaned against the doorframe. It was a long-barreled Pennsylvania, piece his father had carried during the War of 1812. The stock had been mended twice. The barrel bore scratches from decades of use, but it still shot straight. Harrigan cleaned it more faithfully than he cared for anything else he owned. Many evenings he sat with the gun balanced across his knees, running an oilcloth through the barrel, while considering how easy it would be. One quick shot, simple, final, quiet. No more debts. No more sorrow. No more watching Ruth Ann's home collapse around him. But he never did it, partly because of Methodist teachings. No, some more damning, they said, and partly because of the stubborn streak Ruth Ann had alternately adored and scolded. If life meant to crush him, then by God, he would force it to earn the victory. He would not hand it to death for free. That year, November arrived early and merciless. The leaves had shed and vanished by late October, weeks ahead of the usual season. Old-timers said such timing meant a brutal winter on the way. The farmer's almanac predicted deep snow and freezing winds. Harrigan needed more firewood, needed to mend the roof, needed a dozen repairs he had neither the strength nor the money to address. So he did what he had done for the last 3 years. Woke each morning, took a drink to steady his trembling hands, tended to the bare essentials that kept him and his animals alive, and tried not to think about the next day. November 14th, 1847, dawned bleak and pale. Elias woke before the sun, as he always did. His breath drifted as a ghost-like cloud in the frigid air of the cabin. The fire had died to cold ash during the night. Frost glazed inside of the small window, an icy signature temperatures plunging below 20 degrees. Every bone in his body ached with the stiffness of sleeping in cold. His head throbbed. His mouth tasted of metal and mistakes. He reached for the bottle beside his bed, not for warmth, but out of desperate need. The brown glass held rough corn whiskey he bought from a moonshiner 8 miles north. It wasn't quality stuff. It burned on the way down and left him feeling hollow afterward. But it was cheap, and more importantly, it softened the sharp edges of his world. He took one swallow, then a second, feeling the heat unfurl across his chest. Enough to steady him, not enough to dull his wits. That would come later, after whatever work the day demanded. He dressed in what he had left. With trousers worn thin at the knees, a linen shirt that once might have been white, and a jacket Ruth Ann had sewn that hung loosely on his frame now that he'd lost so much weight. His boots were a perpetual problem. His right boot had a hole punched straight through the sole, stuffed with scraps of cloth to keep his foot off the frozen ground. The left boot's laces had snapped and been replaced with rough twine. He looked like what he was, a man teetering at the edge of ruin, too proud to admit it, too exhausted to escape it. When he stepped outside, frost coated everything, as if the world had been dipped in silver. The trees rose black and skeletal against the dull gray sky, their branches like cracks in a sheet of glass. His breath puffed out in sharp white bursts. The cold was so intense it felt like punishment. Somewhere far off, a crow cried out, its call echoing to the hollow like a warning. The chicken coop door hung open, swaying softly in the wind. Damn it, he had forgotten to latch it again. His mind was slipping, losing track of even the simplest tasks. And the fox, always watching, would come. The fox never missed an opportunity. It had taken 2 of his hens already that year, and he couldn't afford to lose another. He couldn't afford to lose any more. But when he reached the coop, all 4 chickens remained inside, pressed together for warmth in the corner, staring at him with that perfected, empty suspicion chickens had mastered over centuries of domestication. For sets of beady eyes glinted at him, for bundles of ruffled feathers huddled tight against the cold, present, alive, and intact. But something had frightened them. Their water dish lay overturned, the spilled water frozen into an uneven patch of ice. Scattered feet littered the dirt floor, kicked aside in frantic scratching. Even the rooster, normally aggressive and quick to challenge, was silent, jammed into the back corner, his neck stretched tall, his gaze fixed past Elias, toward the tree 60 yards away. Harrigan followed the rooster's stare. Beyond the coop lay a wall of timber, dense oak, hickory, and pine clustered so tightly that even in winter, with the leaves gone, the eye could barely penetrate 30 feet. It was good hunting land, he supposed, at least in the days when he had the strength to hunt. Now the woods only felt oppressive, like they were leaning inward, judging him for every failure he'd ever made. Something moved between the trees. His stomach tightened. His hand went to his belt by habit, where a knife used to hang. But the knife was inside the cabin. He was unarmed, cold, and half-drunk. Whatever lurked out there held every advantage. The shape shifted again. Then it stepped into view, and his breath caught. His mind rebelled against his eyes. 2 figures emerged from the forest. Women. That was his first thought. His second thought was that he must be seeing wrong, because no women could be that size. They must have been closer than they appeared. The dawn light must have been confusing perspective, bending shadows. That had to be it. But they kept walking, and the scale didn't change. They were, in fact, enormous, and impossibly so. Each step they took was measured and deliberate, as if they were walking across shattered glass. They wore coarse slave garments, undyed Osnaburg shifts, torn and dirt-stained after days, maybe weeks, of brutal travel. Their clothing hung loose, made for field labor, not modesty. Their feet, bare on the frost-covered ground, were cut, swollen, bleeding, far beyond ordinary blisters. But their size was what rooted Elias to the spot. The first woman stood easily 6.5 feet tall, maybe more, wide-shouldered, her arms thick as a grown man's thighs. She wasn't stretched or deformed. She was perfectly proportioned, simply scaled upward, powerful and imposing. The second woman was taller still, close to 7 feet by Elias's guess, though his mind fought the number. She was built like the first, but carried less muscle. She walked with a wavering, near-collapsing gait, swaying heavily with each step. The first woman kept a firm, steadying hand on her arm, guiding her forward. Their skin was darker than most enslaved people Elias had seen in Knox County, deep brown, almost blue-black beneath the thin morning light. Their hair was shorn close to their scalps, likely to prevent it from being seized during pursuit. Their faces were striking, broad noses, high cheekbones, eyes wide-set and sharp. There was something dignified in their features, something that hinted at lineages far from Kentucky, far from America entirely. The stronger woman bore a scar down the left side of her face, pale and old, running from ear to mouth. The taller woman's right hand was grotesquely swollen, knuckles cracked open, bleeding, the sort of injury earned from striking something hard, or someone. As they exited the tree, more details surfaced, details that twisted Elias's stomach. Their backs were marked with whip scars, visible through torn fabric. Some scars were old, raised, and pale. Others were fresh, red and weeping, the wounds splitting open from cold and strain. The taller woman's feet weren't merely hurt. They were destroyed. Blood streaked the frost. Her soles looked more like raw flesh than skin. It was a miracle she was upright at all, that she was still walking bordered on impossible. They stopped 30 feet from the cabin. Just stopped, standing in the shimmering frost, saying nothing. The stronger woman's gaze swept across the yard, the coop, the cabin, and finally Elias himself, calculating, assessing, reading the situation with precision of someone who had long ago learned to judge danger instantly. The taller woman swayed again. Her eyes were unfocused, glazed. She was surviving solely on will. Elias recognized that look. He had seen it in men pushed past the limits of their bodies. She had hours left, maybe less. They stood motionless, waiting, watching him as if the next breath he took might decide their fate. Elias's mind spun through frantic calculations. Runaways. They had to be runaways. The torn clothes, the injuries, the silence, it all screamed fugitives, which meant someone was hunting them, which meant a reward. $47 owed to the dry goods store. Maybe 50, maybe more. Women like this, so large, would have been valuable, costly, the kind of property no master would relinquish without a fight. His hand drifted toward the long rifle leaning beside the cabin door. He didn't even know what he meant to do. He wasn't considering shooting. He wasn't thinking at all, just reaching for something solid, something powerful, in the face of something beyond comprehension. Water, the stronger woman said. Her voice was barely more than a rasp, but it carried through the cold air with startling clarity. Please, English. She spoke English. Clean, fully formed, without the heavy accent Elias expected from newly purchased slaves brought straight from auction. His grandfather used to tell stories about the ships, about people taken from African coasts, thrown into chains, arriving speaking languages no one around them understood. Many lived their entire lives learning only enough English to take commands. But these women spoke, which meant they had been in America for years, long enough to be owned, traded, punished, and pursued, which meant someone nearby was missing valuable property, which meant someone nearby wanted them back badly. Please, the woman said again. She coughed, a deep, wet rattle that warned of fluid in her lungs. Bright blood appeared at the corner of her mouth, shockingly vivid against her dark skin, as stark as a signal flare. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, smearing a crimson streak across her cheek. Harrigan's hand slipped away from the rifle. He didn't consciously think the decision. His body simply moved, crossing the yard toward these two impossibly large women who, if they chose to, could probably break a spine without much effort. The stronger woman tensed the moment he approached. Her good hand curled into a fist, her stance shifted, sliding subtly between Elias and the taller woman. Protective, alert, ready to act. But she didn't strike. She only watched with eyes that carried more exhaustion than fear, eyes that had already witnessed the worst human beings could do to one another, and were now only waiting to see which type of man stood before them. Up close, the full brutality of their injuries became unmistakable, and something twisted painfully inside Elias's chest. Whip scars crossed the stronger woman's back in every direction. Older welts overlapped newer wounds. Someone had beaten her recently, and beaten her savagely. Some cuts oozed yellowish infection at their edges. The taller woman's feet were worse than he had imagined. They weren't merely cut, they were shredded. The soles were torn open, raw flesh exposed, dirt and grit embedded deep in the wounds. She should have been screaming. Instead, she just swayed on her feet, semi-conscious. Her eyes fluttered half shut. Both women were gaunt, their cheekbones drawn and sharp beneath taut skin. Their arms were thin, ribs visible beneath the torn shifts. They had been starving before they fled. Running had stripped away the rest. They looked like they'd shed 20 pounds each in a matter of days. "Come inside," Elias heard himself say. The words escaped before reason could catch them, before thoughts of the law, consequences, or survival could intervene, before he considered that bringing fugitive slaves into his home was a crime that could destroy his life. Before someone sees you. The stronger woman studied him for a long, silent moment, evaluating, measuring the risk. Then she nodded once, helped her sister take a step, then another. They approached the cabin with the slow, wary movements of cornered animals, watchful, tense, prepared to flee or fight. Inside, the stronger woman positioned herself between Elias and her companion at all times. Her eyes swept the room continuously, rifle, knife on the table, window, door. She was mapping exits, weapons, dangers. The taller woman collapsed the moment she crossed the threshold. Her legs simply buckled. She fell with enough force to shake the cabin walls. The stronger woman knelt beside her instantly, easing her head into her lap and murmuring in a language Elias didn't recognize. Not English. Not any native dialect he had heard. Something older, melodic, foreign in a way that stirred a strange unease. Elias stood frozen in the doorway, suddenly unsure of everything. He had just harbored runaway slaves. And the penalty for that? 6 months in prison. A $1,000 fine, a sum so impossible it might as well have been a ransom of a king. He didn't have $1,000. He didn't have 10. When the law came, and it always came, they would take his land, his cabin, every scrap Ruthin had loved. They would strip him of everything. He could still fix this. He could saddle the mule, ride to town, tell Carver Michaels at the store, tell the magistrate. Men would ride out. The women would be gone by midday. And Elias would become a celebrated citizen, a man who fulfilled his duty. His debts erased, his reputation restored. People would speak to him again, welcome him back into the fold. All he had to do was choose himself over them. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice sounded too loud in his own ears. The stronger woman looked up at him. "Clara," she said. Her voice was deeper than most women's, but crisp, educated. Someone had taught her proper speech. "This is my sister, Rosella." Sisters. It explained everything. The fierce protectiveness, the constant glances, the refusal to relax even for a moment. "Where are you running from?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. Her eyes hardened. For an instant, Elias thought she would refuse to answer. But then, with a weary resignation that suggested she had calculated every possible outcome, she said, "Lexington, the Talberton estate." Elias knew the name. Everyone in central Kentucky did. The Talbertons owned nearly 3,000 acres and more than 200 enslaved people, one of the old aristocratic families who had come west from Virginia when Kentucky was still wilderness. They bred racehorses that won purses in Louisville and Lexington. They grew tobacco that fetched premium prices in eastern cities. They own a townhouse in Lexington, another near Frankfort. They were wealthy in the way that made other wealthy men envious. And apparently, they had owned these two women. "Lexington's about 150 miles from here," Elias said slowly. "You walk that?" "Most of it," Clara murmured, glancing down at her sister. Rosella's breathing had turned shallow, rapid. Her skin had gone gray. Her eyes were completely shut. "Some nights we rode in wagons. People helped. Not many, but some. The Underground Railroad. Harrigan had always known it existed. Everyone had, but he had never imagined he would find himself inside it. Conductors, stations, a hidden web of people defying the law. Quakers, free black families, white abolitionists, all risking everything because they believed human souls outweighed property deeds. Elias had always believed in property rights. That was the foundation of civilization, a cornerstone, non-negotiable. And yet, here these two women were, broken, dying, human, without property laws, without something protecting what a man claimed as his own. Society slid into chaos. That was what Elias had been taught from childhood. You couldn't just take what belonged to someone else, no matter how strongly you felt about it. But these weren't horses or tools or sections of land. They were people, people who spoke, people who protected each other, people who had walked 150 miles on ruined feet, because whatever they had escaped was worse than the bleeding. "I'll get you water," Harrigan said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "And food. But then you need to go." He crossed the room to the water barrel, filled a tin cup, and brought it to Clara. She took it in her good hand, the left one, since the right was swollen and mangled, and pressed it gently to Rosella's lips. Rosella drank like someone dying of thirst, water spilling down her chin as her throat worked to swallow. When the cup emptied, she made a faint sound, not words, just need. Clara handed the cup back. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but heavy, full of meaning, risk, and acknowledgement of what this kindness cost him. "Don't thank me yet. You can't stay. Men will be looking for you. Patrollers, trackers. They'll search every barn, cabin, and woodshed within 100 miles once they realize you're missing." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They all understood. "We know," Clara said, voice steady though her eyes betrayed fear and fatigue. "We just need a few hours. Let Rose recover her strength. Then we move on." "To where?" he asked. "North. Ohio. Canada." Ohio lay 70 miles away. Canada over 1,000. Elias looked at Rosella, barely conscious, feet destroyed, breathing ragged. She wouldn't make it 70 yards, let alone 70 miles. He should turn them in. The thought returned with persistent logic. Saddle the mule, ride to Barbersville, tell Carver Michaels or the magistrate, collect a reward, pay his debts, earn favor with the Talbertons, maybe enough credit to buy next year's seed. It was a sensible option, the legal one, the choice nearly any man in his position would make. Instead, he walked to the small larder Ruth and had once insisted he build and retrieve the last of his cornbread and a heel of ham he had been saving for Sunday supper. It wasn't much. The cornbread was 2 days old and turning stale, the ham mostly bone, but it was food. And these women needed food more desperately than he needed a planned meal. He set the food before Clara, who stared as though unsure it were real. Her hand trembled as she reached out. She tore the cornbread in half, giving the larger portion to Rosella, who devoured it with mechanical hunger, swallowing and chewing without a hint of pleasure. Clara gnawed at the ham bone, working every shred of meat loose with her teeth. "Eat," Elias said unnecessarily. They were already eating. "Both of you. I'll keep watch." He didn't know why he said it. Didn't know what madness had seized him. Didn't know when he decided that two fugitives mattered more than his own survival. Ruth then would have understood. She had always been better than him. Kinder, clearer about what was right. She wouldn't have hesitated to help. Maybe that was why he did it. Maybe he was trying to be the man she believed he could be, instead of the wreck he'd become. Or maybe he was simply tired. Tired of making the wrong choices. Tired of choosing survival over decency. Tired of being the kind of man who looked at suffering and did nothing because doing something was inconvenient. He picked up his rifle, sat beside the window, and settled in to wait. They slept. Clara resisted for nearly half an hour before exhaustion claimed her. One moment she sat upright, eyes tracking Elias warily. The next, her head dropped forward, her body surrendering after days without true rest. She slumped against the wall, Rosella's head still in her lap, and began to snore softly. Elias kept watch by the window, rifle across his knees, eyes on the narrow road. Morning faded into afternoon. The weak sunlight briefly warmed the hollow. Frost melted. Water dripped in steady rhythms from the cabin roof. No one came. That was unusual. On most days someone passed. A peddler, a neighbor, a traveler between towns. But November 14th remained unervingly quiet. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the hollow. The forest stood still as held breath. Around 2 o'clock, Clara awoke. She snapped to consciousness with the alertness of a soldier. No grogginess, no confusion. She sat up slowly, cataloging everything in the room. Exits, weapons, threats. Her gaze settled on Elias. "You're still here," she said. "It's my cabin. You know what I meant." He didn't answer. Not immediately. Because he didn't have an answer, not a simple one. He was here because he'd chosen to be. Because returning to the man he'd been felt impossible now. Because a part of him Ruth had nurtured, buried but not dead, still believed in doing the right thing. "Tell me something," he said finally, deflecting. "Why'd you run?" Clara looked down at Rosella, still sleeping, her breathing steadier now. When Clara finally spoke, her voice carried no anger, no tears, only facts. A report given by someone who had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury. They were going to separate us, Rose and me. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. "Master Talberton's youngest son married last month," Clara continued. "He's moving to Mississippi, to a plantation near Natchez. He wanted to take Rose with him." Her eyes hardened. His new wife had heard about us, about our height. She wanted Rose as the spectacle, something to show visitors, something to make guests whisper about her, a curiosity. That's what she called Rose. Clara's voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, just a flat recounting of something so cruel it hardly needed emotion. Elias felt a cold heaviness settle in his gut. "And you?" he asked quietly. "I was to stay," Clara answered. "Work the fields." They liked how much I could lift, how much labor I could do. 2 women's work, Master Talberton said. Worth the feed, worth the trouble. He'd bring visitors just to watch me carry things, parade me around like livestock. "Look at my giant girl," he'd say, strong as a mule, probably has giant blood in her. She paused. He invented stories about us. Said our mother lay with some African titan. Said we were proof of different breeds of people. Explained us the way he explained horses, bloodlines, traits, value. She spoke as if reciting someone else's biography, but underneath the even tone Elias heard something ancient and burning, rage carved so deep it had become part of her bones. "How long have you 2 been together?" he asked. "All our lives. We're twins, born the same night, same mother." A shadow crossed her face. "She died when we were small. Fever. From then on, it was just us. Twins." It explained everything. The resemblance, the fierce protectiveness, the way Clara never let Rosella out of her sight. Running alone would have been easier, but abandoning her sister had never been an option. "She's sick," Elias murmured, glancing at Rosella. Her breathing carried that wet rattle, though her color had improved slightly. "I know," Clara said, "but she'll pull through. Rose is stronger than she looks. She looks half dead." Then imagine how strong she must be to still be alive. There was defiance in Clara's voice, a refusal to acknowledge the obvious. Elias knew the tone well. He had sounded the same in Ruth Ann's final days, insisting she would recover even as her pulse faded beneath his fingertips. Hope was sometimes a lifeline, sometimes a lie you told yourself because the truth was too sharp to endure. "Why are you so tall?" he asked suddenly. He hadn't meant to. The question slipped out, born of shock and bewilderment. He had never encountered anyone like them. Clara's expression tightened. "Our mother was tall, nearly 6 feet, unusual for a woman. Our father, too, they said he was enormous, though we never knew him. Sold away before we were born. Others claimed he was 7 feet or more. Master Talberton used to call it fawny blood, said we had the blood of giants." She exhaled slowly. He liked telling buyers we were descended from some mythical African tribe. Made us sound exotic, valuable, even when we were children, especially when we were children. Her jaw clenched. "These girls will fetch a fortune," he'd say. "Tall ones always do. Strong workers, good breeders." The way she said breeders twisted Elias's stomach. He didn't want to know more. Some truths were too foul to look at directly. "Any other family?" he asked. "No, just us. Our mother had 3 children before us, normal-sized, all sold off before we were born. We never met them, never heard their names. Mother couldn't bear speaking of them." Her voice softened. "We were her last, her strange ones." The phrase held both pride and grief. A sound outside snapped them both to stillness. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, fast. The rhythmic pounding echoed through the hollow. Hoofbeats on frozen earth, the jingle attack, leather creaking in motion, coming from the main road, coming closer. Elias rose sharply and moved the window. 3 riders approached the cabin path at a steady trot. Even at distance, he recognized the lead rider, the slouched posture, the lazy reins, the easy seat. Vernon Pritchard, his neighbor. Behind him rode 2 strangers, but their purpose was unmistakable. Rifles slung across saddles, coiled rope hanging from one man's belt. Slave catchers. They were here. "Clara," Elias hissed urgently, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. Under the floorboards, by the hearth. Now! She didn't argue. She didn't waste a breath with questions. She moved with lightning precision, scooping Rosella into her arms as though she weighed little more than a child, even though Rosella had to weigh at least 150 pounds. Clara crossed the cabin in 3 massive strides. Elias was already pulling up the loose planks near the hearth, boards he had intentionally left imperfect, so he could store root vegetables during winter. Beneath him yawned a cramped space barely 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide. Dirt walls, dirt floor, cool in summer, barely warm enough to prevent freezing in winter. Too small for one woman their size. Far too small for 2. But Clara didn't hesitate. She lowered Rosella into the dark space as gently as her trembling arms allowed. Then she folded herself down after her, contorting her massive frame into a crouched, defensive coil. Her head nearly touched the underside of the floorboards. Her knees pressed to her chest. Rosella curled on her side, taking up most of the space, Clara wrapping herself around her like a shield. Their eyes, wide, terrified, trusting, looked up at Elias. They had placed their lives in his hands, not out of faith, but out of necessity. The weight of that trust pressed down on him like a millstone. Elias dropped the floorboards back into place, working with frantic urgency. They were old boards, uneven and loose by design, but his shaking hands fumbled them twice before they settled properly. His hands trembled, not from drink. His hands shook, not from drink this time, but from fear. A raw, animal fear of what was about to step through his doorway. He scattered a thin layer of ash across the boards he'd replaced. Try and make the disturbed would look natural again. Then he grabbed the old cooking pot Ruthin had once used and set it on the hearth as though he'd been heating a meal. Something ordinary. Something benign. Something that didn't look like he was hiding 2 human beings beneath his floor. The knock came the moment he set the pot down. 3 hard raps, sharp and commanding. Elias drew a slow breath, wiped his palms on his trousers, and opened the door. Vernon Pritchard stood there, shifting uncomfortably, his expression apologetic but resolute. Vernon was a slight man, barely 5.5 feet tall, with thinning sandy hair and a permanent squint from years of working with corrosive tanning solutions. Once he'd been a decent neighbor. Now he looked caught between loyalty and dread. "Elias," Vernon said softly, "hate to bother you." "What's going on?" Elias asked. "These gentlemen are looking for runaways," Vernon explained. 2 Negro women, unusually tall. They tracked them to this area. Lost a trail near your property. The taller of the 2 slave catchers stepped forward. He was whipped thin, perhaps 40, with a face carved by hardship. Once, he might have been handsome. Now, only bitterness remained. His eyes were icy blue, January cold. A faint scar ran from his eyebrow to his hairline. His clothes were expensive. Fine leather coat, polished boots, a hat with a snakeskin band. A man who made good money doing ugly work. "Name's Hollis," he said, voice smooth and practiced. "Working for the Talberton family out of Lexington. Been tracking these women for days now. They came through here. We're certain of it." "Haven't seen a soul," Elias replied. Hollis smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of a hunter who knew the rabbit was hiding somewhere close. "Mind if we look around?" he asked. "I do, actually." The smile vanished. "The law says I can search any property when pursuing fugitives. Fugitive Slave Act of '93. You can cooperate or you can obstruct. One of those choices goes badly for you." Vernon cleared his throat nervously. Elias just let them look. "If you got nothing to hide, it'll take 5 minutes." The second slave catcher still hadn't spoken. Younger, no more than 25, with jittery eyes and quick, restless movements. His hand hovered near the pistol at his hip, fingers tapping nervously on the grip. A man dangerous in a way that inexperience made men dangerous, eager, tightly wound, hoping for action. Elias wanted to refuse. He wanted to stand tall, defend his rights as a landowner, protect the sanctity of his home. But he'd seen what happened to people who defied slave catchers. These men carried the full force of the law, the backing of every plantation family in Kentucky, and the weight of the entire social order. They were the hammer. People like Elias were the nails. He stepped aside. The three men entered. Hollis moved to the cabin like a man inspecting livestock stalls, efficient, precise, certain. He'd done this countless times and knew exactly where frightened people hid. He checked corners, lifted blankets, shifted furniture, opened a larder, looked inside the water barrel, and peeled back the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the main room. The younger catcher tapped along the walls, rapping his knuckles against the logs, listening for hollow spaces, searching for secrets. Vernon hovered by the door, looking sick with worry. "Cozy place," Hollis remarked casually. "Could use some upkeep, though. You keeping the farm going all right, Harrigan?" "Well enough," Elias muttered. "Heard you're behind on debts in town. Heard your credit's gone thin. Carmichael talking legal action." Hollis paused, letting the words settle like poison. "That's a hard place for a man to be." "That's none of your concern," Elias said stiffly. "Might be," Hollis replied. "See, there's a hefty reward on these women, $300 each." He watched Elias's face carefully. $600 total. The number struck Elias like a hammer blow. He'd never seen $600 in one place. He couldn't even imagine the sight. That was not just debt cleared. That was a new beginning. Seed for spring. A mule that wasn't ancient. Tools. Supplies. Maybe even a second chance. All he had to do was point at the hearth. Hollis took a step closer to the fireplace. 3 feet away. Then 2. Close enough to feel the faint warmth from a pot Elias had placed there. Close enough to see the thin scatter of ash on the floor. Close enough to notice, if he looked carefully, that the ash lay in unnatural patterns, smeared rather than fallen naturally. "You know," Hollis said lightly, "harboring fugitives carries harsh penalties. 6 months in jail, $1,000 fine, property seizure. But information that lead to capture? That's different. That's civic duty, responsible citizenship, rewarded citizenship." He locked eyes with Elias. Those pale, frostbitten eyes saw everything. They said he'd done this long enough to detect guilt by the way a man breathed, by the flicker in his expression, by the tremor in his hands. He knew. Somehow he knew. Elias's mouth opened. Words gathered on his tongue. For a terrifying heartbeat, he wasn't sure what would come out, a confession, a denial, or some desperate plea. Then, from beneath the floor, Rosella coughed, a soft sound, barely audible, muffled by dirt and wood and ash. But in the silence of the cabin, it rang like a church bell, sharp, human, unmistakable. Hollis's head snapped toward the hearth. The younger slave catcher yanked his pistol free, thumb pulling back the hammer with a metallic click that sounded like a bone breaking. Vernon made a strangled sound, and time froze. Elias saw everything in impossible clarity. The dust motes drifting in the beam of afternoon sun, the grain of the wooden floorboards, the precise angle of Hollis's head as he turned, the cold focus in the young man's eyes, the pistol's hammer cocked and ready. Hollis took a slow step toward the hearth, then another. He was going to check. He was going to lift those boards. He was going to find Clara and Rosella folded into that cramped hollow beneath the floor. And everything Elias had risked, the only good act he managed in 3 years of failure, would be destroyed in an instant. "Wait," Elias said. His voice was steady, shockingly steady. He had expected it to tremble. Hollis paused, turning his head slightly. "Something you want to tell me?" Elias's thoughts twisted, scrambled, collided. There was no clever lie to undo what they'd heard. No trick that could erase the sound of a coughing woman beneath the floorboards. Only 2 choices remained: abandon the sisters to their fate, or fight 3 armed men inside his own home. Neither choice offered survival. But maybe survival wasn't the point anymore. Maybe like a clear beam of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It was about doing what was right. "The women you're after," Elias said carefully, each word chosen like stepping stones over deep water. "They're not here." Hollis straightened, hands sliding toward his pistol. "We just heard." "You heard my hogs," Elias cut in sharply. "Under the cabin. I keep them there in winter. Warmer than the outside pen. One of them's got a cough. Been meaning to butcher it, but sick pork don't sell worth a damn." It was, objectively, the stupidest lie he had ever told. Hogs didn't cough like humans. Their sounds were guttural, animalistic, and no farmer in his right mind stored pigs under his cabin. It was unsanitary, destructive, absurd. Any man with half a brain would know that. But Elias delivered it with such casual irritation, such weary annoyance at having his farming methods questioned, that Hollis hesitated. "Pigs," Hollis repeated flatly. "Pigs," Elias confirmed. "If you want to crawl under there and check, go ahead. Watch your hands, though. Old Sal's mean around strangers. Bit Vernon's boy clean through the boot last month." Vernon, bless him, jumped, and immediately. Silas did mention keeping livestock close this year, after that fox trouble in September. The younger slave catcher looked unsure. "We should check under there." "We should move on," Hollis said abruptly. He withdrew his hand from his pistol, though his pale eyes stayed locked on Elias's face, dissecting every flicker of expression. He didn't buy the pig story. Elias could see that. But Hollis was calculating. Fighting a white landowner over what might be a sick animal would look bad. Shooting a farmer in his own home because he thought he heard something would look even worse. And if they checked and found nothing, if, by some twist of fate, the women had escaped, or if Elias was somehow telling the truth, then Hollis would face consequences even the Talbotons couldn't shield him from. Poor white men held little power, but they held some, and in that moment it was enough. "We'll be back," Hollis said. His voice had the softness of a blade sliding free. "If we learn you lied." "You won't." Hollis stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he turned, walked out the door, and mounted his horse. The younger catcher followed, still gripping his pistol. Vernon paused in the doorway, brow furrowed. "Silas," he said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Elias replied. Vernon shook his head and left. Elias stood at the door, watching the three men ride down the path toward the main road, watching them disappear around the bend, listening until the last hoofbeat died into silence. Only then did his legs buckle. Only then did the weight of what he'd done crash over him. He had lied to slave catchers. He had obstructed a legal search. He had committed a crime that could cost him everything he owned. And he would do it again. That was the most startling part. If Hollis returned right this moment, Elias would lie again. He would keep lying until they dragged him away. When he was certain the men were truly gone, he lifted the loose floorboards. Clara stared up at him, Rosella still cradled tightly in her arms. Both women were barely breathing. Their eyes, while terrified, reflected the kind of fear reserved for hunted creatures, the terror of knowing one's life hung entirely on the mercy of strangers. "They're gone," Elias said. His voice trembled now, releasing the restraint he'd forced upon it. "You're safe." "Why?" Clara whispered. Just one word. Yet it held everything. Why risk everything? Why choose them over his own safety? Why stand between them and the hunters? Elias didn't have one answer. He had too many. Because Ruthin would have wanted him to. Because he was tired of living with nothing but shame. Because $600 could not replace self-respect. Because these women were people, not animals to be hunted. Because sometimes doing one righteous thing mattered more than living through the winter. "I don't know," he said truthfully, "but you can't stay here. They'll be back, maybe tonight, maybe sooner. Next time they'll bring men enough to tear this place apart. Where can we go?" Clara asked. Elias thought, the Methodist preacher? Impossible, too connected, too visible. Anyone at church would turn them in without hesitation. The Quaker family 30 miles north? Maybe. But Rosella would never survive the trip in her condition. Then he remembered a tavern rumor, something he'd overheard months ago and dismissed as drunken talk. A farmer rambling about a free black settlement near the Ohio border. A hidden community built by families who had bought their freedom and pooled resources to purchase land, protected by white abolitionists who believed slavery was evil. It was supposed to be secret, but secrets told in taverns never stayed buried for long. Most people dismissed the rumor as foolish tavern talk, but some had sounded too insistent in their denial, too forceful in the way people do when they're hiding a truth they cannot openly acknowledge. There's a place, Elias said slowly, working through the memory, about 40 miles north near the Ohio line. A settlement, free black families, and white folks who helped them. I don't know exactly where, but I've heard enough to get close. They'll help you cross into Ohio, maybe even all the way to Canada. 40 miles, Clara murmured. She looked down at Rosella, whose eyes fluttered weakly. Rosella was barely conscious, barely clinging to this world. She can't make that on foot. I'll take you in my wagon, Elias said. Tonight, you'll ride hidden under hay and burlap. We leave after dark. Clara stared at him, truly stared, as though trying to see the shape of his soul. For a moment, she seemed unable to process what he was offering. Then tears streaked silently down her cheeks, slow and unsteady, like they were relearning how to fall. Why? She whispered again. Not demanding, just stunned that someone could choose kindness. Elias helped her climb from the cellar. He had no answer that made sense. In truth, he barely understood it himself. He only knew this. Ruthin would have done it. The man he wanted to be would have done it. And since he had already stepped across the line, there was no turning back. All he could do was follow the choice to its end. Whatever end that might be, they spent the afternoon preparing. Elias hitched Jackson to the wagon. It took nearly 20 minutes. Jackson was mean and stubborn, acting as though he sensed something unusual. The wagon itself was old, held together by repairs on top of repairs, but the wheels still turned. That was enough. He piled hay in the wagon bed. Not fresh hay. He couldn't afford that, but musty, brittle leftovers from last year's cutting. It smelled of dust and faint rot, but it would hide two bodies if they stayed still. Clara watched him work. Rosella slept inside the cabin, finally resting, her breathing easy now that danger had passed for the moment. Clara refused to sleep. She stood guard at the door, scanning the treeline with vigilant eyes. You should eat something, Elias said. Long night ahead. We've eaten more today than we have in a week, Clara replied. I'll be all right. He doubted that, but said nothing. He handed her more cornbread anyway, and this time she ate without protest. Tell me about your wife, Clara said suddenly. The one you mentioned, Ruth. Elias stopped mid-task. How did you? You said her name this morning, Clara said softly. When you let us inside, you whispered it. Maybe you don't remember. He didn't remember, but it sounded like something he would have done. Ruthin hovered at the edges of his thoughts always. Hours could pass without him thinking of her, and then a smell or a sound or a flicker of light would drag the grief back full force. She died 3 years ago, he said. Childbirth. Baby too. They're buried by the east fence. I'm sorry, she said. So am I. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with understanding. She must have been a good woman, Clara said quietly. You're doing this for her, aren't you? Helping us. Maybe partly, Elias said, hammering a loose board back into place. But mostly, I think I'm doing it because I'm tired of being the kind of man who doesn't. Clara tilted her head. What kind of man is that? The kind who chooses wrong, Elias said. Who takes the easy road, who survives by not caring. The kind who can watch suffering and say, not my problem. Clara studied him carefully. You're harder on yourself than the world is. "The world barely knows I exist," Elias said. "Never care enough to judge me." "Maybe that's about to change," she said quietly. She was right. By tomorrow or the day after, people would talk. Vernon would tell someone about the visit. Hollis would hear the sick pig story again and grow suspicious. He would return with more men, more authority. Someone would see Elias's wagon on the road late at night. Someone would put together the pieces. Silas Harrigan would be branded an outlaw, a sympathizer, a race traitor, a criminal, all titles he had never wanted. But standing here, watching Clara tend her sister, he found something unexpected. He didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, he was doing something that mattered, something Ruthven would have been proud of, something that finally made him feel like he belonged to the world, instead of merely surviving inside it. As darkness settled over the hollow, they finished their preparations. Elias gave him the last of his food, some dried apples, a small chunk of salt pork. Clara tried to refuse, but he insisted. "You'll need it more than me. I can hunt tomorrow. You need strength now." He'd drawn a rough map from memory, pieced together from tavern gossip. The settlement was somewhere near the border, in a valley protected by hills. There was supposed to be a marker, a distinctive tree with a pale stone at its roots. He wasn't certain, but it was better than nothing. By full dark, around 8, they were ready. Clara carried Rosella to the wagon and laid her gently in the bed. Rosella was conscious now, her eyes aware but weary. She looked at Elias with a mixture of pain, fear, and a fragile hope so delicate he felt it crack inside his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're saving us." "Haven't saved anyone yet," Elias said softly. "Long way to go." Clara climbed into the wagon beside her sister. Elias covered them with hay, layered burlap, then added more hay until the wagon bed looked convincingly ordinary. He made small breathing pockets, careful not to suffocate them. When he finished, the wagon appeared to be nothing more than a load of old hay being hauled for trade. He climbed onto the driver's bench and took the reins. Jackson, of course, refused a move. Elias clicked his tongue. "Nothing." He slapped the reins. Jackson shifted one step and stopped dead again. "I swear to God, Jackson," Elias hissed, "if you don't move this time, I'll sell you for glue." Perhaps sensing real danger in Elias's tone, Jackson finally began to walk, slowly, begrudgingly, but moving nonetheless. They left the farm behind, wagon creaking softly as it rolled into the night. The darkness was clear and cold. A half moon hung above them, lighting the narrow dirt road ahead as they traveled north. A half moon hung above them, offering just enough pale light to follow old hunting paths Elias hadn't used in years. These narrow trails wove through dense forests and skirted the edges of farms, avoiding the main roads whenever possible. Every distant sound made his heart lurch. Every shifting shadow looked like mounted patrols waiting to descend. Twice they had to hide the wagon when travelers approached, Elias steering off the trail and waiting in the darkness among the trees until riders passed. Once, they encountered a full patrol, 3 mounted men with torches, searching the roadside, jabbing into brush, inspecting old sheds with unquestioned authority. Elias simply nodded at them, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Evening. You seen any fugitives?" one of the men called. "No, sir," Elias said, "just on my way to my brother's place, bringing him some hay for his animals." "Long trip for hay at this hour," the man commented. "Promised I'd deliver it. A man's got to keep his word." The patrolman stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "Safe travels." Elias kept driving. Only when the torchlight faded behind them did he allow himself to breathe. Beneath the hay, he heard Clara release a trembling breath of her own. They had missed Discovery by perhaps 10 feet. They pushed north. Hours slipped by. The land changed subtly, flat farmland giving way to rolling hills, brush thickening into forest. Elias's arms ached from holding the reins, his back protesting every jolt of the old wagon. But he pressed on. Around midnight, Rosella began coughing again. The hay muffled it, but the sound was still too loud for Elias's nerves. He found a small stream, guided the wagon off the road, and let the sisters rise for a moment. Clara eased Rosella upright, helping her sip water cupped in her palms. How much farther? Clara whispered. 15, maybe 20 miles. Elias said, hard to be sure at night. Will we make it before sunrise? I think so. We have to. Daylight meant danger. A white farmer traveling with two enormous black women would draw questions everywhere, and questions meant discovery. They rested 10 minutes, no more, then continued on. Dawn began to color the sky as they approached the region Elias hoped was the right one. His internal map was fragmented, pieced together from drunken conversations and half-remembered hints, but the terrain matched. Hills, shallow valleys, and a creek that might be the same creek described long ago. Then he saw it, a massive oak tree with a pale stone resting at its roots. Relief washed through him, so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. They had made it. The settlement appeared in the soft dawn light, a cluster of simple cabins surrounding a modest church, with cultivated fields stretching behind them. It wasn't large, it wasn't wealthy, but it was filled with people who moved with a freedom Elias had rarely seen. Heads held high, backs straight, eyes unafraid. They were free. An elderly woman approached first. Small, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, someone who missed nothing. She looked from Elias to the wagon, to the hay, then back to him. When she nodded, it was with the certainty of someone who understood exactly what was happening. Name's Dina, she said. You carrying passengers? 2 women, Elias replied. They need help getting to Ohio. Dina didn't ask anything else. She called for others, and several people hurried forward, helping carefully lift Rosella from the wagon. Rosella could barely stand. 2 men had to support her. Clara followed behind, scanning every face and structure with wary, protective awareness. Dina touched Rosella's forehead, listened to her breathing, examined her ruined feet. She clicked her tongue in disapproval. Child's half dead, but she'll live. Get her inside. Warm broth, water, herbs for fever. They carried Rosella into a nearby cabin. Clara remained behind for a moment. She looked back at Elias, her face a mix of gratitude, fear, and something like guilt. You should go, she said quietly, before daylight, before someone sees you here. I know, he replied, though he did not move immediately. He stood there, suddenly unsure what to do next. He had brought them here. Now what? Return home and wait for consequences? For questions? For suspicion? You did a good thing, Dina said, appearing beside him without him noticing. Risky, foolish, but good. I didn't do it to be good, Elias muttered. Doesn't matter why you did it, she said. Matters that you did. She handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth, bread, dried meat, a jar of preserves, more than he had given the sisters, for the journey back. Then she pressed something else into his hand. Don't open it till you're home. Elias nodded silently. Clara emerged from the cabin and approached him. Her injured hand was bound with cloth now. When she reached him, she held out a small cloth pouch. Master Talbot's son, she said softly, the one who wanted to take Rose. He kept gold coins in his room. I took these before we ran. She placed a bundle in Elias's hand. For helping us. He opened the cloth. 3 gold coins gleamed in the morning light. $, 20 pieces. $60 total. Not 600, but enough to pay his debts. Enough to buy seed. Enough to survive the coming season. I can't take this, Elias said. You can, Clara replied. And you will. We won't need money where we're going. Canada doesn't care about U.S. coin. But you need it here, for when men start asking questions, for when Carmichael comes for his money. Her gaze hardened, not unkindly, but unyieldingly. You gave us our lives. These coins are nothing. He tried protest, But Clara's expression ended any argument. He closed his hand around the coins, feeling their weight. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," Clara said softly. "Thank you." She looked at him for a long moment. "I hope your Ruth knows what you did today. I think she would be proud." His throat tightened. He could not speak. He only nodded. Then he climbed onto the wagon, turned Jackson toward home, and began the long ride back. He never saw them again. That was the hardest part, not knowing if they made it to Ohio, not knowing if they reached Canada, not knowing if Rosella survived her injuries, not knowing if Clara ever felt safe again, not knowing if his sacrifice mattered. For weeks, months, and eventually years afterward, Elias found himself wondering, had the sisters reached Ohio? Had they crossed into Canada? Were they living free? Or had Hollis caught up to them somewhere along the trail? Had they been dragged back, punished for daring to run? Rumors drifted to him over time, fragments overheard from travelers, merchants, and wandering laborers. 2 exceptionally tall black women, people said, had been seen working at a lumber camp near Toronto. They were free, the story went, strong, earning good wages, living together in a modest home they'd built with their own hands. Whether those stories were about Clara and Rosella, or 2 entirely different women, Elias never knew, but he chose to believe they were true. He chose to believe his risk had meant something. The Talberton family posted reward notices for months, then years. The bills appeared on the courthouse wall, at the dry goods store, at the tavern. $300 each for the return of 2 enslaved women named Clara and Rosella, property of James Talberton of Lexington. Height, approximately 6.5 to 7 feet. Any information should be reported immediately. No one ever collected the reward. The women vanished as thoroughly as if swallowed by the earth. Eventually, the notices came down. Perhaps the Talbertons grew tired of advertising their failure. Perhaps the humiliation outweighed the hope of recovering their property. Hollis never returned to Knox County. Elias heard later that the slave catcher had been killed in Louisville during a botched kidnapping, shot by a free black man he'd tried to sell south. The news brought Elias a grim, private satisfaction. Vernon Pitts never again mentioned that November day, but something shifted between them. Vernon waved when they met on the road, but he no longer stopped to talk, no longer invited Elias for supper, no longer asked for help with tanning work. Their friendship didn't end. It simply became cautious, distant, as if Vernon realized Elias Harrigan was not the man he'd assumed, and complexity made people uneasy. Elias used the $60 to clear his debts. He walked into Carmichael's store one frosty December morning and set 3 gold coins on the counter. Carmichael looked at them as though they might vanish. Then he pulled out his ledger, recorded the payment, and handed Elias a written receipt. $47, paid in full, Carmichael said. Leaves 13. I'll keep it as credit for your spring seed. Seed won't come in until March, Elias replied. I'll wait. Carmichael nodded, though his eyes were sharp with curiosity. Where'd you come across money like this, Silas? If you don't mind me asking. I mind, Elias answered. That ended the conversation. But when Elias stepped out into the cold street, his debts were gone and his credit restored. For the first time in 3 hard years, he could walk through town without shame. For the first time, he had choices again. He stopped drinking. Not all at once. His body couldn't handle that. But little by little, 2 drinks instead of 4. Then 1. Then none. The bottle stayed on the bedside table for weeks before he finally poured the whiskey out and smashed the glass in the yard. He repaired the cabin roof, fixed the chicken coop, and planted winter wheat in the western field. His body resisted the labor at first. It had forgotten how, but slowly he rebuilt himself into something resembling the man Rithen had once believed he could be. 5 years later, in 1852, he remarried. Her name was Margaret, a widow from Barboursville whose husband had died of fever. She had no children and no illusions about romance. They married for practical reasons. She needed help managing her late husband's land, and Elias needed a reason to keep moving forward. It wasn't love, not at first, but it grew into partnership, then respect, then a quiet kind of contentment. They had 3 daughters, Sarah in 1853, Ellen in 1855, Mary in 1857. Elias loved them fiercely, more deeply than he knew he was capable of. He told them stories at night, fairy tales, Bible passages, legends of early Kentucky settlers, but never the story of the November morning that reshaped his life. When the girls asked about the saddest day he'd ever lived, he would look toward the eastern fence where Ruth Ann's small wooden cross still stood. "The day I became the loneliest man in Kentucky," he would say, and they would nod, knowing he meant the day their mother, the first mother, the one they never knew, had died. But when they asked about his proudest day, he only smiled faintly and said nothing at all. Some stories were too dangerous to share. Some truths had to remain hidden. Even years later, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made harboring runaways a crime with lifelong consequences. A confession could still cost him his land, his freedom, maybe even his family. So he kept the secret. And on certain cold November nights, when frost coated the fields and the trees stood dark against the sky, Elias would walk to Ruth Ann's grave and whisper, "I did one thing right. Finally, I hope you see." The incident never entered official history. The sealed court record that briefly mentioned 2 unusually tall enslaved women was lost in the courthouse fire of 1889. Families who'd known pieces of the story took their knowledge with them to their graves. In the end, what survived was only a whisper, an unverified tale of a poor Kentucky farmer who chose mercy over profit, and 2 sisters who became legends at the edges of forgotten documents. Years later, in 1875, when Elias was 62 and feeling age in every bone, a letter arrived with no return address. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Inside was a single sentence: "We made it. We're free. We think of you often. Thank you for choosing kindness when the world demanded cruelty. You gave us our lives back. We hope you found yours. With gratitude and respect, C.N.R." Elias read the letter 3 times. Then he burned it, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fire. Evidence destroyed, safety preserved. But he kept the memory, held it close, a reminder that a single act of goodness could ripple outward for decades. He died peacefully in 1880, in the same cabin he had once shared with Ruth Ann, and later with Margaret. His daughters found him at dawn, hands folded across his chest. At the funeral, the preacher spoke about faith and perseverance. Margaret spoke of his loyalty. His daughters spoke of his kindness. No one mentioned the 2 fugitive women. No one mentioned the wagon ride north. No one spoke of the gold coins or the risk he'd taken. No one uttered a word about the choice that had defined his soul. But at the edge of the cemetery, away from the crowd, an elderly black woman watched the burial. She was unusually tall, close to 6 feet, and leaned heavily on a cane. When the service ended, she approached Margaret. "Your husband," the woman said, her voice carrying a northern cadence, "was a good man. Did you know him?" Margaret asked. The tall woman smiled faintly. "Once, long ago." She placed a small cloth bundle on Ruth Ann's grave, the grave beside Silas's newly dug one, then turned to leave. "Tell his daughters," she said, "that their father saved lives. Tell them he mattered." Before Margaret could ask her name, she slipped into the departing crowd and vanished. Inside the cloth bundle was a single gold coin, a $20 piece, a final payment on a debt settled decades before. A quiet reminder that the stories we never tell are often the ones that define us most. What do you think of this story? Do you believe it happened as told? Did every truth come to light? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark, forgotten stories from American history, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone who loves lost legends. Until next time, remember, the greatest acts of courage are often the ones history never records.